how do you feel the bass clarinet is close to the tenor saxophone? Being a tenor saxophonist, uh, why did you choose the bass clarinet, and what are the similarities that you find in playing both, if any?
Well, I'll answer the first. Why did I choose the bass clarinet? Well, the bass clarinet kind of chose me. My brother Ruben, my older brother, he's 18 months older than me. He played the clarinet growing up. So when it came for me to, when I was 9 years old, and it came from time for me to get an instrument in school, I wanted the alto, so I got an alto. And my brother had played the clarinet for a couple of years already, and so I definitely didn't want to start on the clarinet like they do most alto players or reed players in general, woodwinds. They always start you out on the clarinet during those times, but I didn't want to play clarinet specifically because my brother played it, and my cousin played the trumpet, and he was playing it in church, and so I needed an instrument that they didn't have. My cousin played trumpet, and he played clarinet already, so the alto was perfect for me. I remember the first day I got my instrument, I got it at school, and I took it to church and played it that night. Because, I mean, I was in the band. I was playing bongos in the band. My mom was playing piano, my dad was playing guitar, my brother playing clarinet, and my cousin on trumpet already, but they were waiting for me. And when I came, I mean, I remember the preacher said, "Wow, young David sounds very exuberant over there." I mean, I was squeaking and squawking. I didn't know the fingerings or anything, but I had the enthusiasm. He says, "Young David, he's going to be good. He's going to be good one day." So, so that's why I played the saxophone. And as far as the bass clarinet, when I when I was when I got married, the first time, my first marriage, my friend, good friend James Newton, he gave me a bass clarinet for my wedding present. I guess I was 22, 23, and and I was the world saxophone had began, quartet had began, and I could give Blue a little support on the bottom notes with the bass clarinet. And so it worked out for me that I could play bass clarinet. I see it as an extension of the low part of my tenor. I can't go as low, so I just, I'm not really a clarinet player because I didn't start out on the clarinet, but I took lessons after my brother stopped playing when I was about 16. I took lessons for about a year and a half on the clarinet. And then the guy went up in the price, and then I discontinued the lessons, but then I continued to play flute and piccolo, you know. So that was a long process. But to get to the bass clarinet, it took me a while, and like I said, I didn't really play it until I was a grown up, until I was 23 or so.
Okay, this is the first time you ever play with Ivo, right? With Ivo Perelman. And
yes.
How was the general feeling of the session, being a first time, and being himself being a tenor player only, and you alter ego bass clarinet tenor player? And do you recall how you met him in the first place and how you...
I remember Ivo coming to my house. I guess it must have been the 80s because I thought it was in the 70s, but I guess he didn't get there till the 80s. So he must have came over one of my... It must have been over on 7th Avenue South. I just remember him coming in, and he had a good sound, fresh new cat on the scene, and very much like myself in the 70s, but he was coming from Brazil. And I liked what he was doing, and he was very inquisitive, and it seemed like, tenor players, we have a certain kind of, if you like other guy's sound, it reflects. And I've never really had problems playing with other saxophone players, even though we tend to be competitive, yes, but at the same time, there's a camaraderie that exists between tenor players. Playing with the World Saxophone Quartet, I enjoy playing with other saxophone players. It's really not a competition for me. It's a matter of making them smooth them together. I mean, you could play very smoothly when the World Saxophone Quartet, when we started out, we were all trying to play against each other. Then finally we did a Duke Ellington album, and I think it all came together in the arrangements. And then we learned how to really support one another. And with me playing the bass clarinet and playing the bass notes with Blewett on the baritone, and then Blewett started playing the alto clarinet, we figured out a way to be the two anchors on one side on each side, and Oliver Lake and Julius Hemphill in the middle, and it made a real band. We were kind of like Blewett and I were kind of like the rhythm section in the band. and the other two were like the soloists. And so you have to really think about how you're going to make a band, especially if it's just saxophones.
Right. Fred Hopkins played in your band for a significant part of your career.
Yes.
And he also worked with Ivo for a good chunk of time.
Yeah.
How do you feel that this connection relate to you and him, and especially today? Would you say that his spirit was hovering over, or could you feel some of that?
Fred's spirit is always around. If he's here or not here, Fred's spirit is all through this music. He and Steve McCall were really the anchor of the whole loft jazz movement. As a rhythm section, anybody could stand in front of them and sound great. And Fred in particular, Fred was able to read so well. His technique was on such a high level. He could read so well. Even when he was inebriated, he still could read. I remember one night we were playing out at Yoshi's in Oakland, and we were playing some Grateful Dead charts that I had done during that period. And I realized that Fred was playing, but he was playing the chart upside down. So I reached around and reached his paper on the stand, this music stand, and I turned it right side up, and then he started playing it right. So, I mean, even backwards, he was playing it perfect. And forwards, he sounded extraordinary. But, he was looking at the music upside down.
Unbelievable. Just a quick question about the music that took place here today. Ivo's background is clearly non-North American. He's from Brazil, and although he plays free jazz. You have an extensive background coming from California, moving to New York, then living in Europe with all kinds of influence in your playing. Where do you think you guys met today? Rhythmically, harmonically, spiritually, everything different than that?
Oh, yeah, I think on all levels we meet. I mean, we're very similar. I have a spirituality in my background. I have a human cause. My sound on the bass clarinet is pretty much organic. I think Ivo is a musician who probably thinks organically, and probably lives that way too. I think we think likewise in terms of tonal values. I mean, we both like to write songs that are melodic. That's important. When it comes to the idea of free jazz, I never really related to that terminology or avant-garde or any of those things. But people, I guess, need those words to explain where or put people in a box and figure out where they're coming from. But I personally just see it all as good music. I like to exploit the melodic content of the music. I like to dwell on the history of jazz. I'm a real jazz player that's been influenced by blues and gospel. So and also I'm an ex-athlete. So you put that all together and you got who I am. And I think Ivo is probably a person that probably operates on that same basis.
In what ways has living in Paris affected your musical life? Does the distance from the States in some ways liberate your imagination?
Well, from Paris, I was able to do a lot of world music jaunts into Africa, into the Caribbean, into Cuba, into places like that. I did a lot of different records all over the world, Argentina, South Africa, recordings in Dakar, for instance. Different parts of the world. I mean, I do in Studio Grimm in Cuba. I did 3 or 4 albums there. So that part of my life is probably over. I stayed there 22 years. So I think I've done my African experience. I've done my Caribbean experience. Now I'm back home in America, and I'm bringing the experience of all that I've accomplished and all that I've done. In Paris, I was able to reach out to Europe and to Africa easier than from here. So that's a big thing. So I cherish that time. And my daughter, she's 19. She has a record contract with Because Records, and she's a singer. She's excellent. And my son Ruben, he's born French and he speaks English, and he just was sworn in to the United States State Department as an ambassador to the United States. So my son is excelled in English, which I taught him, and my daughter's singing in English, which I taught her, and I'm very proud of that. So those are my big accomplishments, I think, from living in Paris, other than understanding the trying to absorb the language and the culture and the history of Europe. It's been very, very interesting time for me. I mean, I'm always learning, and it's nice to put yourself in different situations of which you can learn about other people, about other cultures. I was just on a tour in Italy. I had an opportunity to go to Capri, to go to the Vatican, to go to see a Picasso museum in Malaga, in his hometown. I mean, I'm a very lucky man, I could say that.
Great. You grew up in Oakland, California. Were you at all connected to the Bay Area community during your musical upbringing? Did you, for instance, interact with Pharoah Sanders, Bobby Hutcherson, James Leary, or Harold Land?
Yes, I knew all those guys, but they were a little older than me. I was under those guys. So I'd see them on the stage. I see them at the Keystone Corner. I seen them, but I was a little younger than they were.
All right. Perhaps you can talk about the differences when playing written out octet or big band arrangements, as opposed to playing in the World Saxophone Quartet and the David Murray Quartet. And how is that different from what you did today, playing improvised duets with Ivo?
Well, in the David Murray Quartet and in the World Saxophone Quartet, there's probably more written music than there is in the octet. So, and the octet has also written music. Everything we do is written music. This is a very good experience to do improvised music. That's something completely different. And I thank you for this experience. It's nice to do this experience with Ivo to play music that is not written. Most situations I play in, there's always written music.
Maybe you could discuss some of the predecessors of the music that inspired you. It seems like you enjoy a huge range of composers like Mingus, Ellington, Ornette Coleman, Monk, and others.
Yeah, there's a lot of others. I mean, there are great arrangers all throughout jazz. I mean, he mentioned a few, but there are also other composers like James Newton, Henry Threadgill, Julius Hemphill, Oliver Lake. There's a lot of great Muhar, Richard Abrams, Anthony Braxton. There are a lot of great composers in jazz, in contemporary jazz. Roscoe Mitchell, George Russell. Gil Evans, great writers. Then there are people who are great composers like Jimmy, the guy who just died, the great arranger. Arrangers, they don't get a lot of credit. Some of the great arrangers in jazz. Oh, everybody knows Quincy, but there are other people besides Quincy that are. The guy who used to do Damaronia. Remember Damaronia?
Yeah.
Who's the guy who
Tad
did
Dameron?
Tad Dameron. I mean, this is the kind of arranging that I study personally. These are some of my favorite. Being a composer is one thing, but being an arranger in jazz is quite highly another level. And so those are the people that I really appreciate.
Cool. Your taste in soloists is quite wide also. Liking Albert Ayler, Artie Shepp, but also Coleman Hawkins, Ben Webster, and Paul Gonsalves. Can you elaborate on this idea?
Well, they're great soloists, all of them. And, Sonny Rollins comes to mind, Sonny Stitt, people My contemporaries, like Clifford Jordan, people like that I had a chance to know. A lot of great tenor players, a lot of players. Coleman Hawkins and Ben Webster. I mean, everything comes from Coleman Hawkins. Everything that tenor players play comes from Coleman Hawkins. I don't care who you are, Charlie Parker or Sonny Rollins, you had to go through Coleman Hawkins. That's the beginning of the jazz sound of the saxophone in jazz. He created that rhythmically and harmonically. So we have to go to the old man for that. And there are many tributaries, many different canals that lead to his source, but it all begins there.
Okay, 2 or 3 more? Yeah. Do you find it liberating to play more than one instrument? And the bass clarinet was an interesting choice. I think you've answered that already.
Yeah, well, I like the bass clarinet because it gives me a time to, it depends on the kind of song I like to play, things that are waltzes and slow ballads and things where they can hear the breath of the bass clarinet because it's a very organic sound. Sounds like, I like to get to the point where it sounds like I'm blowing on a tree, because it is wood, ebony. And if I could just get the sound of it, it kind of relieves people from my tenor sound during a concert, which can be overwhelming sometimes. And when I play it on maybe the 3rd or 4th song, I'll go to the bass clarinet instead of playing a ballad on tenor, instead of playing like, Body and Soul or playing the Chelsea Bridge or something. I might go to the bass clarinet to kind of slow it down and give the people a chance to rechannel their ears with another instrument and play it with a lot of breath. And they like the vibrato. It kind of, and I noticed that women always seem to like that, the change of pace. You play slow and breathily. It's kind of like, what's that guy, Barry White? He used to come out and like talk to the women. Yeah, baby, you know what I'm talking about. And when the man comes home, you gotta take care of him. As opposed to,
Yeah.
So it's a change of pace, Cool. So this instrument, it helps me on stage. It helps me to catch my breath, and it helps me to slow it down, and it soothes the audience at the same time. And then the women come. It's a beautiful thing.
Beautiful. Last question. You've played with many different musicians, like Pierre Dorje,
oh yeah,
or the Grateful Dead, or Khalil El-Zabar, as well as musicians that are well known, like McPhee Tyner, Randy Weston, Jack DeJohnette. Can you please comment on this?
Oh yeah, Max Roach. Yeah, I played with Max Roach of the World Saxophone Quartet. Playing with great stars, it always puts a feather in your cap. To say that you play with people that are great like that, Elvin Jones, McCoy Tyner, Pharaoh, Archie. These are my contemporaries, and I'm very lucky to be in the line just under them, because they're in their 80s. I'm in my 60s. I'll be in my 70s in a little while, and somebody will be looking at me the way I'm looking at them. You too. It's just they give you, when you get really, really old, they finally give you one last recognition. So I guess we're waiting around for that.